What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly, and before we jump into today's conversation with Danyah Aossey, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. Number one, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving a rating and a review. The more positive ratings and reviews we get, the more it helps new people find the podcast, and it really helps to grow the community that we're developing here. And if you're one of those people that have recently found the podcast, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here. Make sure you subscribe, stay tuned for future episodes. And to everybody listening, please consider screenshotting this, post it to your Instagram story, tagging at My Social Life Podcast, and I'll feature you on the account and send you a message as well. Now, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Danyah Aossey. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. Today, I'm joined by Danyah Aossey, and Danyah is the most recent videographer on Team GaryVee, and I'm very excited to have her here on the podcast today. Danyah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Where I want to start today's podcast is I want to go all the way back, and I want to talk about school, because you went to school, I think if my research is correct, for interior design, right?
I did, yeah.
I was going to say, I'm always curious as to what people in the digital space kind of went to school for first and kind of how they ended up falling into digital.
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's in interior design. It was very much a situation where I wish I had found Gary about 10 years earlier. I went to school. It was kind of always a agreement in my family that you just got a college degree, and showed up to my advisor one day and they were like, hey, you like to draw and you like all of that, so why not interior design? And so I got a degree in something that I will literally never use.
So but did you enjoy that process? And at the time, did you think that your career goal was to get into design?
I've always been someone that doesn't really look too far ahead in terms of the next step. I knew I enjoyed it at the time. I had some amazing teachers that I learned a lot about. The process, the profession, all of that is very interesting to me, but I don't think I was ever able to see myself doing it. I was always a TV kid. I was always super into media, and it just never really clicked with me during college. Mm-hmm. And then my senior year, I was like, I do not want to pick out pillows for the rest of my life. And joined the TV station, and it was kind of all downhill from there in the best way possible.
Yeah. So is there anything at all, you said, you don't want to be picking out pillows for the rest of your life, but is there anything at all over the time at school that you kind of still sticks with you today?
Absolutely. I mean, so my specialization throughout that was lighting and kind of understanding how you can build a space, and just with the lights you use. Using different lights, textures, things like that really builds a story within your space. And I think I was able to kind of transition that into later film school and all of that and bring that with me.
Oh, awesome. So I do want to talk about film for a little bit. So you said it was at the local TV station where you really kind of got your first foray into film?
Yeah, it was it was a college station. And I was able to kind of get in, work with those old school big studio cameras, which was great. And learn about the whole process of producing and creating TV shows, and then see the back end of it and learn a little bit about editing. It was a great experience.
So it was film and videography and all that, something you always wanted to do, or was it something you kind of discovered as you were going to school?
See, I think on some level I always wanted to do it. I was always the kid that loved movies, loved TV, loved all of that. But it never really occurred to me until I was much older than the average person that most people find it when they're preteens. I was 24 and I was wait, people get paid to do this? And I kind of fell into it that way. I was a lot older. I never even considered working in media until late into my college years.
Mm-hmm. And then eventually you were an office production assistant for Steve Jobs, right?
I was, yep. I got my master's in production in San Francisco. And so I did the whole old school film school path. And one of my teachers in that was the production manager on Steve Jobs. And I was lucky enough and had enough initiative to go up to her and be like, hey, I'd love to work. And she set me up with a day playing job, which basically means you go in for one day, you're a freelancer, And one day turned into 3 days, I worked the rest of the film. So that was a massive crash course.
Yeah, that's awesome. Though. It's like, what are some things that you did during those first couple of days where one day turned to 3, which turned into more, that made you stand out and allowed you kind of stick within that role?
Yeah, definitely. I think just showing up and being willing to, especially in like traditional media, there's so many people on a film set that in order to stand out, you really have to show up, and no job is too small. I've cleaned up cow poop off of sets. I've been in a parking lot for 12 and a half hours. I've, done all of those things. And I think really showing up with a good attitude and being willing to do that makes you stand out, because a lot of people show up, they don't expect how hard it is and how much hard work goes into that. And it's hard to regulate your attitude when you're on hour 14 and someone's like, will you go get me a coffee? And you're like, yep.
I mean, I'm sure that's something that kind of still sticks with you today. That was like a really valuable lesson to learn early on that like you can apply to pretty much anything going forward. But eventually you kind of got out of the traditional media space and kind of went more into digital. I think you have written somewhere, it was somewhere on your Twitter bio, I think, that you were like recovering film nerd or something like that. So sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask how you kind of ended up making that switch from traditional more to a digital space.
Yeah, absolutely. After I went to school, I moved to LA and I was like working for reality TV shows, and really kind of got the business side of the film industry really like pushed on me. And that was great. I loved it. And then I was wrapping up a show one day, went to lunch. On my way back, I got into a car accident and really screwed up my back. And suddenly carrying, 50 to 70 pound camera cases was no longer an option for me. And it was like, okay, you like this. What's your next step? How are you going to adjust to these circumstances? And my priority at that point was to heal and figure it out as I went. So I ended up moving home with my mother for 2 years, and they, social media was something that I was always passionate about learning from like a personal standpoint. And I took a job as a social media project manager at a nonprofit, and really just was able to like cut my teeth learning all of the business side of social media, and learning all of that, and really learning how hard it is to create media, especially for nonprofits, and like that storytelling aspect.
There's a couple things I kind of want to unpack from that there. First thing being, what reality TV shows did you work on when you were in LA?
Yeah. So I was on a Food Network show called The Greatest Food Truck Race, which was really kind of my first job out of school, out of Steve Jobs, all of that, that I like applied for and got on my own merit outside of knowing connections. And that was, I guess, like they race food trucks across the country, and it's a reality show. Then I was able to, again, show up, work hard, made a connection with the production manager on that set. And when I moved to LA, he set me up with a job with Suspect, which is the spinoff of Catfish on MTV. And I was on the first season of that for a couple episodes. And then I was able to then use another connection to get onto a show called America's Greatest Makers, which was a tech-based reality show, kind of like a tech version of Shark Tank. It was really great.
So getting that first job right at school, then how do you do that? Because I feel like it's a daunting thing to try and find your way into the entertainment industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the one thing that is the first job is always the hardest job. Getting your first position in any industry is the most difficult, because you don't really have anything to point back to and say like, I have good work ethic or whatever. You're just kind of flying blind. So the best thing for me was really making sure that like I had connections with my faculty out of school. The best part of school was really the networking opportunities that I got, and leveraging those to get that first position, and then using that paired with asking a million people that worked in the industry, like, how do I write out my resume? What's a good cover letter? What do you look for when you're hiring someone? Is it something where I need to be DMing people on Instagram, working for free, doing all of that? And really getting like candid advice from people that had already done it, and then showing up and being ready to just work your ass off.
Mm-hmm. And then, so when you got into that car accident, that's pretty scary. Like, what was kind of your thought process when you realized you couldn't really do traditional film anymore?
I mean, I have a lot of respect for people that deal with chronic pain now. Before that, I was like, I didn't really kind of understand it. Obviously, I was always the type of like, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But it was definitely like in that split second, a kid came home from work and he fell asleep at the wheel, and it completely changed my life. And it was one of those things that like, it's definitely scary because I was so set on, I'm going to be a producer. I'm going to do this life. I'm going to live in LA. I'm going to be this person. And just in a split second, my life was like, no, you're not. You're going to go in this other direction. It may take you away from where you want to be, but it's going to work out in the end, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that ever somewhere down the line, you'll get back into the traditional industry?
So yes and no. I don't know that the traditional industry is going to be the traditional industry forever. So I really think that the way things are moving with Facebook and YouTube and all of these online platforms creating content at the scale and the production value that they are, I think we're looking at a completely different landscape when it comes to what we think of as quote unquote traditional industry. Digital and traditional are going to meet in the middle somewhere. So do I want to work on like content that is narrative and fictional and all of that? Again, I would love to. I love being on set. I love doing that. But I don't know that it'll necessarily, like, our movie studios aren't going to be our movie studios forever.
Mm-hmm. But like, that's actually kind of perfect, because this is where I was leading with the next point. Was I wanted to ask you about Netflix, because I feel like Netflix is almost set like the gold standard for how you should be creating content in a digital world with their Netflix originals. And they've almost kind of shifted at least from like my perspective, they've kind of shifted the preferred medium of telling a story from a movie to a TV show, because with the TV show, you're just allowed so much more time to tell that story. And they're starting to put more budget and get better, like bigger named actors into their shows. Like, is that something you've seen where we're starting to shift more to wanting to consume a TV show versus the movies?
I definitely think so. I think that the movies are having to compete with TV, whereas TV used to have to compete with the theater. And it's just flipped it on its head, where, you go home and you binge watch these like amazing narrative shows that are just so deep and such large scales. When you look at like Game of Thrones, the absolute insanity that goes into making a series like that was never something that was even conceptualized for TV even 20 years ago. So being able to kind of see that progression of now moving on to digital platforms like Netflix, and, really seeing them build out the meat of a TV show is amazing. 100%.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And like, just also from like a narrative perspective, back like 20 years ago, Game of Thrones wouldn't have been for TV, but then wouldn't have been for a movie either, because you couldn't properly tell that story in a 2-hour time frame.
Yeah. But I mean, you see PBS doing things like that over time, but it was on such a smaller scale. You had like your Masterpiece Theater, where it was these elongated mini series. But now it's like they can bring in you were very tight in what you could do there. It was like older stories, you know what a Masterpiece Theater feels like. It's like a British old time show, but now they can bring in dragons and they can do all of these like insane things because we have the technical capacity to do that, and the audience wants it.
Mm-hmm. And it's just exciting to see kind of where that's going to evolve over time. But I did want to ask you some of the content that you have created in the past, starting with your YouTube channel. I'm not trying to call you out with this, but you put out a video 5 months ago where your goal is to upload weekly.
I know.
And like you've only posted once. Is that just like a matter of being so busy? Like, what kind of happened with your YouTube?
Absolutely. I mean, it's something where being in front of the camera is an entirely different ballpark in terms of being behind the camera. So like coming into Vayner, I was like, I'm totally going to be able to post all the time. I'm going to do it right. I know people have come before me and said they're going to do their own content as well as like this position. And I was so wrong. But I mean, it's something I love and I definitely want to make more content. It's just at this point, it's figuring out, a healthy work-life balance, let alone like adding the added stress of like creating content on top of it.
So what is like your ideal scenario for your YouTube channel when you're creating content regularly?
One more time, explain that a little bit more to me. Do you mean like long-term goals or like every time I sit down to make a video?
Well, like if you were in a scenario where you could be uploading weekly, what would your kind of YouTube strategy be? What kind of content would you be making? Would it be once a week, twice a week? Like what would your overall YouTube look like if you were posting weekly?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In an ideal world, I would post a couple times a week. Obviously, I think that that's pretty much the normal for someone that is doing like an active growth strategy on YouTube, is to post multiple times a week, have a really set strategy of when you're posting, how you're communicating that to your audience, creating content that is both equally creatively fulfilling for you and what your audience wants, which I think is kind of the most difficult balancing act. Because it's very easy to be like, I'm going to just make tutorials and value content that people can look up and search, but that may not always convert that viewer into a subscriber or an active viewer over a long term. And so it's interesting to kind of see how people are handling that and that play. But yeah, I think I would probably, I like creating content that is very almost talking head, lets me sit down and explain ideas more than having like active in the field. Although I think that's shifting a little bit. That's always been like my go-to. And now working where I work and getting that experience, I would want to really kind of use that as a playground to build my skills even further and be like, okay, maybe I want to make something that's totally right field this week. But because I'm not relying on that as like a career path or a long-term, I'm not paying my bills with that, like I can play with it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to like building an account, like you said, like you have to make sure it's equally what you want to be creating and what your audience wants to watch. And I was actually listening to, funny that you say tutorials, because I was listening to Babbitt on the Chase Jarvis podcast today. And he was talking about how like he could be making tutorials if he really wanted to blow up his YouTube channel, but he doesn't really want to be making tutorials.
Exactly. And that was a really great podcast, by the way. And I think he has such a unique style that like he could absolutely make tutorials in that style and pop off. But if you're not doing something you love, they're like, you can equally be as unhappy in a cubicle as you can be making content and being an influencer. So it's really about finding what sets you on fire and makes you happy. Otherwise, like, why are you doing it? It's so much easier to go get a job at a bank and do what you want on the weekends than it is to like actively put all that pressure on your shoulders if you're not happy doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But when it comes to growing a YouTube channel, I noticed that you are certified by Google in YouTube channel growth. So like what kind of all goes into getting that certification?
Yeah, so that certification, there's like 3 tiers through YouTube. And I think a lot of people don't know, but it's free to sign up. And it's literally, you just go through and you read the most up-to-date information through Google. Granted, they don't give you a lot of like insight on the algorithm or anything like that, but they say like, these are the steps to really assist someone in growing their channel. And then you take a quiz at the end, fill it out. It's not as hard as it looks, actually. it takes some time, but it's definitely worth it. And it's a good insight in terms of like, if you actively want to pursue using YouTube in any capacity, like why wouldn't you want to learn from the creators of it or the runner?
Yeah. How much time did that take you to do?
So I did it very casually over probably a week. More than anything, I'm an extremely slow reader. I'm a very much a visual kid, so reading takes some time for me. And it is a lot of reading and understanding and making sure that you comprehend that. But yeah, probably about a week. It didn't take very long.
Okay, that's not too bad at all, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But for anybody that's kind of feeling a little lazy and doesn't want to put in a full week, do you have any like quick tips when it comes to YouTube channel growth?
I mean, honestly, get your feet wet. Start making stuff. Like, having a certification is great when it comes to working in social media, but nothing's going to help you more than actually having experience. Like, I understand things about the back end of YouTube because I was uploading videos. I may not have been the most consistent. I may not have, had 10 million subscribers, but you learn so much by actively doing, putting those videos up, creating those edits, learning like, oh, I need to subtitle this, or what's my thumbnail click-through rate. All of those things come from physically doing the reps.
Mm-hmm. And I think an important part too is like once you do put in those reps and you are uploading, it's taking the time to go back and see what's working and what isn't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Reflecting on what you've done and kind of strategizing your next step is huge and probably the hardest part.
Yeah, definitely the hardest part.
Yeah.
But I want to ask about your other social media. Do you have any like plans to kind of start creating micro content for anything, whether it be Instagram, Twitter, your LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely looking at what Babin and D-Rock and all of the people on my team are doing on Instagram is insane. Like Jason, all of the creators around me that are doing just insane things with their Instagram and playing with that, that's definitely a goal of mine. To be completely blunt, I just forget. Like, I need to be better about it, but I'm like, oh yeah, I probably should have posted that picture I took 2 weeks ago. But yeah, I don't know. It hasn't been a priority of late, and it needs to be.
Yeah. And I know you started a couple podcasts back in the day too. I found Dose of Danyah, and I love that too.
God, yeah.
Is starting a podcast something like, or restarting one potentially down the line, something you're looking at, or you're more focused on the video and visual part of social?
Yeah, I mean, I like podcasts. Oh, I love that too. It was like a great, again, to cut your teeth. Like I learned how to edit a podcast. I learned Adobe Audition. There's, a certain level of time that goes into having a podcast with someone else who Amara is a great friend. She's got a great presence online and she's just killing it, but trying to coordinate East Coast to West Coast can be a little strenuous. So that was probably why that fizzled out. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of playing in the gray area right now and just learning as much as I can.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you're very busy too with your job, so it's tough to try and figure out exactly which avenue to go down and then actually creating the content.
Yeah.
But you also, while we're still on the topic of social media, I wanted to ask you about your consulting business, Social Addict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, during my time in Phoenix, I worked with small businesses, entrepreneurs, and really just help them with their social strategies. So when you have, a small business, you may not have the understanding of how to market that. And I think for so many people that are 35 plus, like social media can be a little bit difficult for them. Not in like a generalization, but like they physically did not grow up with it and they're trying to like figure it out as they go. And so it was really just honestly sitting down with people and being like, okay, this is what I see on your social presence. And this is where I see you guys being able to take that. And these are my suggestions. It was really a lot of strategy sessions, but it was a great way to kind of build off being at home, living at home and wanting to learn and test and have all of that without really having to build my own audience and do all of that.
Yeah. And so like when you say strategy, like you weren't involved in implementation at all, you were just kind of helping them like basically like put them in the right direction and they do the implementation side?
Yeah, basically. So I was in a position when I was in Arizona that I knew I didn't want to be there long term. And it was more of a bridge for me. And so I didn't want to take on really building out someone's strategy because like that is such a time undertaking. And I think when you take on a client like that, you really have to be in it for at least 3 to 6 months, because that's really when you start seeing the growth and the strategy change and you're able to kind of give them a value return. So a lot of my work where I was like implementing creative and things was a lot of spec work. I was working for free. I was going out filming videos for nonprofits and things like that. But when it came to like the business side, I never want to take money for something that like I'm not going to 100% stress out about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I want
Yeah.
to provide as much value as I can, but if I don't think I have 100% value to provide, I don't ever want to be in a situation where someone's paying me to do that.
That's fair. But with social addict, you were making money, right? Like that was
Yeah,
like,
it
yeah.
definitely helped. It was more of like a freelance side hustle for a long time. And it's definitely, someday a goal of mine, I think, to kind of, again, I don't really know where I'll be in the next 10 years, but like it's there.
That's fair. So how did you go about landing clients? Like what is your advice for anyone that's looking to start their own consulting business?
Honestly, it comes back to networking again. I was going to networking events. I was DMing friends. I was reaching out to old professors and clients that I had worked for free and been like, this worked out for you. If you ever have any situation where you need more, let me know. Teachers, relatives, like just really being super upfront about the fact that I'm trying to make a living doing this and I'm good at it and you're going to get the best of me and let me know if you want it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of with that in mind, I wanted to pick your brain on a couple different social media trends currently, just to see what like your opinion on them.
Okay.
Do you think people are using social media too much right now?
See, that's something that like I've kind of been chewing on lately of is there such a thing as too much? I think that I see both sides of the argument. I see the idea that, with everything being non-chronological in terms of the feeds and the algorithms, like how much is someone really seeing what you're putting out there? So like in that capacity, put out more, like put out as much as you can. You're not going to oversaturate. But on the flip side, if someone's really active, the algorithm is going to prioritize that and they can get tired of it. They're like, I'm over it. And then all of a sudden you've lost someone that was otherwise really well engaged. So I think it's about putting out stuff that you feel really good about. A lot of people don't have a 35-person team like Gary does. So it's the idea of like, how do you provide tangible value to your customers in a way that they're like, oh, so-and-so posted today. Like I need to consume this content. And I think you can have better luck, in my opinion, to create stuff that's tailored to your client or the person that you're trying to reach. And rather than putting out 50 pieces because you feel like you have to put out 50 pieces and they're all half done.
Mm-hmm. And what about Instagram removing likes? That's something that they're testing up here in Canada right now where you can't see anybody else's likes. Do you think that would be a good move for them to take platform wide, or do you think it's better where we can see people's likes?
See, I don't know. I wonder in terms of what that's going to do on the back end. Like, how do you gauge the success of your posts? And it's going to change the entire game. The darker part of me wants them to take it platform wide because I want to play in that unknown and like figure it out. But I don't know what value Instagram would bring without that kind of validation. And there's a dark side to that and like the unhealthy parts, but that really is what Instagram has become and what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Is Snapchat dead?
I don't think it is because so many of my friends use it. I think it's much more personalized. It feels very almost like a messenger app of it's not Instagram. It's definitely not like I'm speaking to the masses. It's more I'm reaching out to my best friend and I want like a private way to do that.
That's a good way to explain it. Like it's not necessarily a great social network right now, but it's a great communications app. That
Exactly.
makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Because like I don't know about you, but I don't direct message stories on Instagram to my friends that are directly for them. Like that just feels like Instagram's like having a microphone, Snapchat's like being on the phone.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good way to put it. Like speaking of Snapchat, like everyone says right now, it's kind of geared towards the 13 to 17 demo. With that in mind, have you played around with TikTok at all? Because that's also like the exact same demographic.
Yeah, TikTok is something that we're really trying to figure out, and it is a different demo. And I've played a little bit in terms of like, it's kind of like, in my opinion, it's Musical.ly and Vine had a baby, and I didn't really use either of those apps. So it's like I'm trying to learn German overnight. But I have definitely played with it a little bit, and I'm intrigued to see where it's going to end up because it's becoming huge.
Yeah, it is. Like I've just only probably in the last week jumped on it, and like I should have jumped on it earlier. Like Brandon Hatcher was telling me back in February, like this is a cool app. You gotta like he spends a lot of time on it, and like I jumped on it a couple days ago. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of funny. Like a lot of these people are younger than me, so it's like trying to figure out how I would fit into that whole ecosystem and like.
Yep.
It's
well,
just.
But I think you always find out the people that come into that and really make the app their own are the people that pop off. When you look at like Sean Duras on Snapchat or like, Casey Neistat on YouTube, back when he started making videos, like it was cat videos. It was people uploading their diaries or whatever it was. He defined a platform, and Sean Duras did the same thing, or the guy that drew little monsters on top of his stories on Snapchat, like different things like that. I think stepping into a platform that may or may not be your demographic and kind of molding the platform to your own narrative can be extremely successful.
Are you guys playing around with IGTV at all? Do you think that there's some potential there? Do you think Instagram really has to figure that out still?
Oh, 100%. Almost everything we do is IGTV. There's just such a great cohesive space between having it in the news feed, allowing you to link out to it, allowing you to link direct from stories to IGTV. I'm really impressed with what Instagram's doing with IGTV. And I think now that they've linked putting it in the news feed was just hands down so smart, because it took something that felt very detached in the app and kind of integrated it into, anything over a minute, like automatically you want it to be an IGTV. So it's making it more integrated. I love IGTV, and I'm very excited to see what other creators start doing with it, because I think there's a lot to be done in terms of the vertical video and the platform and playing with different, layouts and how to utilize that real estate other than just, a straight 9x16.
That's actually great, because that's what I was going to ask next is, do you think eventually we're going to start people creating more frequently in a vertical format? Because right now IGTV is usually like people take their rectangular video or their horizontal videos, and they'll just have like a tilt the screen thing right before their video starts, or they'll size it into like an IGTV size with like headers and stuff. But with platforms like TikTok and IGTV, do you think we're going to start seeing people create more frequently in a vertical format?
I don't know how we couldn't, because the world is in such a mobile platform capacity right now. And it's really, I don't see it going backwards. Like, if anything, we're only going to become more dependent on our phones or whatever the next ideation of that is. And so vertical video is really not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And it's, we're kind of seeing the very beginnings of what the creative capacity of that is. You've got 100 years of landscape video that you're looking at, 100 years of people trying things and changing things and learning new things. Vertical is like an entirely new frontier.
Yeah. And another thing with video, where do you land on with short videos for social versus long videos for social?
I think it plays with the platform. So the platform and your audience, TikTok, anything over 60 seconds, really, it's not built for that. So you're not really getting the audience retention. People are scrolling through a news feed and you're getting, a split second to catch their attention, and you may only have it for 15. Whereas like someone goes to YouTube to sit down and watch a 45-minute video. And you're definitely seeing video links go to the outer edges. Like there's not as many in the middle anymore. It's like 10 minutes plus or a minute or less, kind of playing in that 5-minute range. I don't know. I don't see it as much anymore.
That's fair. And before we kind of move on here, is there any other things with the social media space that kind of has your attention? Any predictions you have or trends you're keeping an eye
on? I'm really kind of intrigued with this whole house party thing. I know a lot of people aren't talking about it, but I think that there's something interesting in video chat to a larger audience, kind of the social form of chat roulette, and kind of meeting people digitally in a new space is interesting to me. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I try not to predict. That's not I try not to predict. That's not my skill set.
That's
But
fair.
yeah, I like to watch. I like to see.
Yeah. But with something like House Party, do you think it becoming more of a social platform? Because I feel like right now it's kind of in that Snapchat territory where it's not really
Yeah.
social. It's more like communication. But could you kind of like foresee it becoming more social to some
Yeah.
respect?
I definitely think I don't know that it'll necessarily be House Party, but I think that there's a space where, just like we used to go into networking events in person, like I think there's a space for an app like that, whether it's WhatsApp or House Party or whatever that is currently in that world. I think what group messaging did to text messaging is going to eventually move into the video space. I definitely think that's coming.
That's interesting. But I do want to kind of move on to Vayner now.
Yeah.
So how or when did you first apply for the videography residency?
Yeah. So it's kind of a funny story. So Gary announced Empathy on his birthday last year. Had a big live stream, announced all of it. And he was like, go check out this video. We made it for Empathy. I was always intrigued with what they were doing. I've been watching Gary for so long. I love the video editing, and kind of the skill behind his team has always fascinated me. So I went and watched this video, and while it was a very good video, it was extremely corporate. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm not going to share that, but it's a great video. Like, good job. And then I just had this moment of like, I should make one. So I ended up making a 54-second teaser of Empathy, literally ripped the corporate video off of YouTube and recut it, put my music on it, my own like version of what I envisioned, and tweeted it at him. And luckily, like, I went into his Twitter, Empathy was still pinned because it was like so new and relevant. And I just responded to that. He retweeted it, and it got quite a few views. It was more views than I've ever seen on something I've made. So that was interesting. And Trouty and Nate, who are the co-owners of Empathy, reached out to me, and they were like, we love your video. Do you mind if we post it? And obviously I was like, please take it. Like, I'll give you whatever you want. And they posted it, and that was a very exciting couple days. And then I was like, well, I've always wanted to live in New York. I was like, there's an inkling of a chance that they know my name at this point. Like, let's do it. And I literally went on the website, filled out the interview or the application, sent in all my information a day later, and I got an email the next morning about an interview. Wow. So like everyone's like, how'd you get your job at Vayner? And I'm like, I literally applied on the website. Like, it's not that exciting.
Yeah, but I'm sure that video certainly helped. Like, you were able to stand out because you made that video.
I've talked to Justin, the guy that hired me, and he actually didn't see the video until the day he interviewed me. So I don't know. So Vayner's application requires that you fill out a bunch of questions. And I poured over those questions, really making sure that like everything was set up. I really wanted my resume and my portfolio to speak for itself. And, in my mind, I was like, oh, it's definitely the video. And then I found out later it wasn't actually the video.
So talk to me about that moment where you found out you got the job.
I everything in my capacity to not cry. It was insane. So you go through several interviews with several people, and mind you, I'm sitting down on a video chat with people that they were the equivalent to celebrities in my mind. Andy and D-Rock and these people that I've been watching for so long, and I'm on a Google Hangout with them, and they're asking me questions about what I do. And so the whole process was very surreal. And then, so I had a second interview a week later, and then it was like right around Christmas, and I heard nothing. And I was like, well, that was fun. I didn't get the job. And so come January, I ended up following up and reaching out and being like, is there anything I can answer for you guys? Like, I'm very interested in this position. What can I do to like build out my skill sets more? And they reached out to me the next day, and I got the job offer. And it was very exciting and kind of terrifying because it was like, okay, you start in 30 days. Like, how are you getting to New York? And I had zero plans at all. It wasn't like I was planning to move to New York and I was already on my way, like nothing. So figuring that out kind of dulled the excitement for me. It was like, which is good because I would have been out of my mind. And it was more like go time, like figure it out, let's go. And yeah, it was very surreal. I'm still every day I show up and I'm like, they're going to figure out that they made a mistake. And I wasn't the one that they were supposed to hire or something like that, like that beautiful millennial imposter syndrome.
Do you think that it was a follow-up email then that kind of helped you get that position? Like, was it one, just to show that you truly were interested, but two, you showed the initiative to be like, is there anything else that I could learn to help better my chances?
Maybe. I don't think it hurt. And I definitely think that it was a situation where there are so many people vying for certain positions that like just taking that extra step of initiative and being like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still interested. I still want this. What do I need? Can benefit you across the board. Being the loudest person in the room can sometimes make sure that you're noticed.
Mm-hmm. And so talk to me about that 30-day window where you were living in one part of the country and you had to move to a completely new part with no plan.
Yeah. So I actually, when I was applying for Vayner, had taken a job elsewhere because I hadn't heard. And I was like, I obviously didn't get it. There's so many people that go after this job. Like, it makes sense. So I accepted another position and was going through the training process. And, you know, I found out literally my last day of training, I was getting this job and I was moving. So it was, luckily the company was so gracious and like really cool about it. But I walked in and I was like, I'm so sorry that you've just trained me and, you know, got me started as a social media manager, but I'm moving to New York in 30 days. So it would have been entirely in their capacity to just be like very upset about that, but they rolled with it. And so it was balancing, you know, I had a friend that I went to film school with that lived out here. And I was like, can I crash on your couch for a couple weeks? And like, I moved here with 2 suitcases and a box. And I sold my car, everything. It was a whirlwind. My mother was moving at the same time. So like, it was definitely stressful, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. I don't think I would have been able to like contain myself. I think a lot of times when life gets really crazy, it makes it a lot easier to handle the big changes. Otherwise, I would have been like stressed out and been like, oh my God, I'm moving to New York in 30 days. What do I do now? Like, I don't know how to explain that, but like too much excitement is never a good thing.
Yeah. And so how long did it take you to find a place then in New York? Like, were you crash on your friend's couch for a while before you did, or was it something like you found pretty quickly?
Yeah. So I actually moved into a place a couple weeks ago. So I was from February to June, like mid-June. My friends, I was lucky enough that they had a spare bedroom. I was able to kind of become like a fourth roommate to them and just like move in. And now I'm in the process of like really looking for a space, which is interesting because New York is an entirely different rental market. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I think really being in that situation where I was like, okay, I'm going to live here. I'm paying rent. Like, I'm going to stay out of the way and be as, you know, gracious as possible really kind of helped. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it took me a couple months.
Yeah, that's crazy though. But you talked about how you sold your car. So with the residency, like I'm pretty sure the Vayner one, it's like 3 to 6 months, right? Yep. So you were pretty much, when you sold your car, you were pretty much betting on yourself at that point, right?
Pot committed. Yes. I moved here and from day one, I was like, I want to be here. What do I need to do to be here? And also at the end of the day, like I know moving to New York, if for whatever reason, Vayner is not a long-term place for me, like I want to be in this city. So that was really just me hedging that bet and being like, well, now you have to make it work, figure it out. Mm-hmm. And so really just kind of leveraging that and moving out here. And Vayner has been amazing. I have learned more in the last 5 months than I think I did in all of my years of education.
I do want to get into what you've learned at Vayner, but But first, talk to me about what it is about New York, because you've referenced it a couple of times. That was like a goal of yours. And I've seen in some places on social, like you were obsessed with the city. So what is it about New York?
I don't know. I am okay. So I think on some level, being a kid growing up, like I was obsessed with seeing New York in media and kind of that glamorized, beautiful version of the city. But I carried that with me all the way through. I've lived in San Francisco. I've lived in LA. I've lived in major cities. And it was always a pipe goal of mine. Like, this is going to be where I live. I may not end up there long term. I may not, but I'm going to live in this city. And so it was really just, how do I get there? When you have a goal and you know where you're at and where you're going, like, it's very easy to look at that as a path. But it was like, okay, I'm going to go to LA for a couple years and figure that out. And then I'm going to go here. And it was more of a zigzag for me. And New York was just like the end goal. I'm just obsessed with the city and the art and how many people are here and just all of it. I don't know how anyone could not love New York. It's so intoxicating.
So I was going to ask, now that you've lived there for 6 years, 6 months, how do you feel about it? But I'm guessing like it's lived up to your expectations.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's very different than what the view that you get on the outside. New York is not an easy city to make it work. But I think if you love it and you really actively take the momentum to go out, and like my first 2 months I was here, I was working, like I did not see New York. I was just saving money and making it work and trying to keep my head above water, being in a new city and in a new job and all of that. And I definitely found myself being like, really, I moved for this. But lately I have really made an effort to go out and like explore New York, actually see the city you live in, which I think a lot of people don't do. And it's crazy. It's a whole new level. I spent last weekend in Central Park and just like, it's an entirely different world from where I came from. West Coast to East Coast is crazy, bizarre, different. But then like New York in itself is completely different. So I'm loving it. Mm-hmm.
That's good to hear. But I was curious about what your day-to-day at Vayner looks like. I know every day is a little bit different, but just kind of like from a high level view.
Absolutely. So the majority, as a videographer, you both film and edit. And right now, the interesting thing with Vayner is the team is growing in terms of Team Gary. They're really trying. For so long, it was creatives in a room doing as much as they could. And so coming into, and really just all about that hustle and grind. Coming into Vayner now, they're looking at it like, okay, we want to expand this. We want to help Gary's brand grow. How do we do that in the most efficient way without, being detrimental to our creatives? And so they're being really, really cognizant of processes and growing things like that, which has been a very interesting transition. And so coming in, I was like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to work 22 hours a day. I'm ready. And it's not that. It's, you work hard here, and it's definitely a pressure cooker of how quickly can you learn? And but they're doing a lot more in terms of like, how do we make this a long-term sustainable? And so for me, I come in every day, I make 3 to 5, if I'm not filming, I make 3 to 5 IG clips or a YouTube video or a TikTok, or we have our list of what we're creating and we sit down and we edit it. And there's 5 of us right now. And every day we make the content. We're editing a lot. And then you go home. It's very interesting to watch kind of the amount of capacity that comes out of that repetitive motion. Because like, you're like, oh, I only made 3 videos today. What am I doing? And then you step back and you realize that we make almost 400 pieces of content a week across the platforms.
That's insane.
Isn't it? It's crazy. And, it's just very cool to like, you don't see the forest through the trees kind of thing. You're sitting there focused on one video. And then you realize that like that video was created and it went on IG and LinkedIn and Facebook, and now it's got millions of views. And that's just one piece of a huge system.
So when you're editing those videos, is there like a specific, like, hey, we need videos of this, or are you given like a bunch of content, you kind of have to comb through it and find those golden moments that will make a great social clip?
So it's both. It's Gary. So like he provides the story. He is like so honed in on his skill sets and his message and really what his goals are in terms of like helping people, that like it makes it almost easy to find those golden moments. He's just like always producing that kind of stuff. And so it can be anything. It'll be sometimes, I'm a little bit of a fan still, even though I work here. Like I go home and I watch DailyVees or I listen to a podcast, or, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because just because I work with Gary, that his message doesn't resonate anymore. Like it's good to have that in your life, period. And just because I work for him doesn't mean I don't need that. So finding those moments, and those moments where you're like, oh, that was a good moment. Then all of a sudden you write it down, and the next day you like go in and you pitch it, and people are like, oh yeah, I liked that moment too. So really kind of finding that. And then there's also the analytics side. We look at what, Gary's always talking about playing to the market. We look at what people like, what did they watch, what really spiked on a YouTube video or a keynote, or something that resonated with one of, the staff members or a client, or it's really just such a wide array.
You said something there that I want to go back on.
Yeah.
You said, I work with Gary. What is that like, working with Gary? Not necessarily on a day-to-day basis, because I know he's in and out of the office, but what is it like working for Gary?
So I'm not going to lie, and I feel comfortable saying this because I've definitely said it to him. I came in with like a sliver of like, if I get there and he's a total dick, I'm going to be so upset. And honestly, my first interaction, like, he is the kindest human being I've ever met. Straight up. He is just very, very hyper aware of his impact on people, his ability to like provide that bird's eye view perspective. And he carries that through to all of his staff as well, which it's standing on the outside looking in. I've been that person. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure he's a real nice guy and you're good. But like, genuinely one of the nicest people I've ever met. It's crazy.
I've heard that. I think you're the fifth person from Vayner I've had on the podcast, and everyone says the exact same.
Really? Well, obviously we've all drank the Kool-Aid and now we've got our talking points. No, I mean, honestly, it's, I think when you work with someone that you've looked up to for so long, like it's hard not to hedge that, because it is a public persona. But like being behind the camera and being in on the live streams, or, editing the content all day, every day, it's like, I'm still waiting for that like sliver of like, wow, that wasn't cool. And I don't have it, because Gary is Gary. Like Gary is just who he is on camera. Yeah. Maybe a little quieter at times, but like that's him.
Yeah. Like everyone always says the exact same thing when it comes to Gary. And will there always be different points in the podcast where people will say something, whether it be like a piece of advice. And I'm like, yeah. I've definitely heard Gary say that before, but I know it's not someone just like ripping what he's saying to say it. It's just been drilled into them so hard that it's one of their beliefs now, and it just comes out.
And we literally like we leave work, and it's hard to like turn it off, because so many of us came into it fans of his content and his message, and then you do it and it works. You're like, oh wow, working for free actually gets me work in the long run. Or, looking at different things with empathy or being kind to people. Like these are not new to Gary, but it's concepts that really resonate across life. So it begins to blur. You're like, okay, am I just like literally repeating Gary all the time? Or are these actually things I believe? And I believe them 100%. I think being nice to someone is a good thing to do. And when you look at like all of his content it's not profoundly new. It's like, don't be an asshole and provide value to the world.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
Speaking of like most people that come in are fans of Gary, one of the pillar pieces of content of his is the DailyVee. Mm-hmm. How cool is that to be a part of recording it and editing that?
Insane. insane. I also, like, coming into this, I'm not going to lie, I came in a little cocky. I was like, I'm so excited. Like, I'm going to just be killing it straight out of the gate. But like the level of just like sheer storytelling chops that like these people that I work with have, and they've been doing it for years, and the ability to take, like, when Gary walks into the office, he books his day in 15-minute increments, and 90% of it is meetings that you can't film. So creating a story out of that, you know, Gary does his work in providing story. He's a great storyteller. He's very fascinating. But like when you literally can't get 5 minutes with him, creating a 5 to 10 minute video around that is so much harder than it looks. And just the ability, like D-Rock, Babin, Caleb, Jason, Dustin, all of them can like look at something and just be like, I see it. And I'm just still astounded at that. I'm learning, but it's crazy.
Yeah. And when you talk about how you've learned so much in your 5 months or 6 months, however it's been at Vayner, what are some lessons that you've kind of taken away from Gary during like those DailyVees shoots where you're following him around for the entire day? Like, what are some things you've learned from Gary himself?
From Gary, I mean, really just how nice he is to people, and really just like, he's constantly on his phone. He's constantly like being pulled in so many directions by so many people, like very, very important people pulling his attention. And he still, every time we walk into somewhere, he's like introduces himself to everyone, or he, you know, takes the time to remember something about someone. Or, you know, the other day we all have like a giant group thread that all of Team Gary is on. And he just will like send like, hey guys, I really appreciate what you're doing. I love you guys. Like, for someone that has so little free time, he is so hyper aware of like that there are other people working towards this goal with him, which is really, really cool. And I want to be more cognizant. I think sometimes when we get busy, we can get very like singularly focused on like survival. But being able to like step back and be like, okay, it's okay. Everything's fine. This is crazy busy, but like, I really appreciate what you're doing. And that's huge. And I would say the other thing would probably be his level of like, he can simultaneously be like, hey, I don't like this, but also like in the grand scheme of things, this is okay. We're going to work through this. We're going to figure this out. Like, he's just so positive. And I tend to be the type of person that when things go wrong, I tend to get in my head and I'm like, oh my God, it turns into like a Chicken Little situation where everything's just horrible and I don't know what to do and all of that. And, you know, the ability for him and most of this team to step back and be like, it's okay. In the grand scheme of things, like, everything will be okay. It's just like a really cool thing to see.
Mm-hmm. And just like speaking of him remembering things, like that always boggles my mind, where he'll be like, someone will ask him a question at a conference or something, but like, Gary, I met you at a conference 2 years ago. And he's like, yeah, I remember. And I'm like, how did, like, he always remembers people. And it just boggles my mind every time that happens. I
just edited something today where he was talking about, he's like, I remember so much about you and I cannot remember your name. So I think it comes with ebbs and flows. Like, he remembers hyper minute details about people. And yeah, that's bizarre watching him do that. And it's a true memory. Like, he's like, oh yeah, you're an Eagles fan. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like,
it's insane. But now, what about lessons you've learned just from being on Team GaryVee, whether it be like things you've learned from doing the work or things you've learned from just being around such a crazy, talented group of people? What are some lessons you've learned there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lessons I'm picking up are you never stop learning. Watching people that have been doing this for years sit next to someone else who hasn't been here as long, and they're like, oh yeah, I really like that idea. Like, it's a very collaborative environment. And also making sure that you don't prioritize perfection. So it's very easy when you look at a DailyVee to be like, oh, that's obviously the most perfect cut ever. But that editor gave up on a lot of like the idealized vision in their head for the health of the speed of the video, the protection of like the schedule, all of those things. They made concessions here and there and all over the place but you're seeing the end product and you're like, well, this is obviously perfect. But being on the flip side, you're like, well, I missed that and I didn't put that there. And like really being like, okay, does it convey a message? Is this the objective I want? And is this the best I can do with the resources and time I have right now?
Mm-hmm. How many hours a day would you ballpark that you work on average?
They're really on it. So like I simultaneously feel like I work a very normal job and also I never stop working. So because of the nature of the business in terms of like my brain is always going. I'm always thinking like I said, I go home and I watch Gary videos because I'm a psychopath. But like, you know what I mean? Like, or I saw Jason the other day, he's literally filming a DailyVee and watching a DailyVee on his phone. Like, I was like, okay, we all need an intervention. But, you know, but also like I'm out of here, like we started talking at 6:30, my day was done. So like you come in at, you know, 9:30, you leave at 6:30. And really creating that healthy schedule is super important because you can get lost in this.
Yeah, definitely. But talk to me about the culture at Vayner, because I don't know many places where people will work all day and then go home and still be in like that work mode where you're consuming. Like, talk to me about the culture there.
Yeah, the culture's kind of insane. So this is my first like traditional corporate job. And so I don't have a ton of experience in corporate world, but from everything that I can gather, this is not normal that you walk in and you're like actively friends with the people you work with. You come to work and like people are just nice. They're kind. They are not like, it's not terribly cutthroat. It's just a very cool atmosphere to be in. And Gary's in the office, you know, every day, but like he's not like eagle-eyeing everyone that make sure they're nice. You know what I mean? Like it's something that has actively been built as like a foundation of this company. When you get hired on, you go through an orientation and they're like, you know, we're a people-centric company. It's very important that, you know, you enjoy your job and that you feel good coming to work. And I thought that was really cool that was like from the get-go. They're like, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier that I've had some people on the podcast before that have worked at Vayner. So I was curious if you had any fun stories or anything about Caleb Ralston, Brandon Hatcher, Seth Feingersh, or Max Brown.
Oh my gosh. One more time. Seth, Caleb, Brandon, and Max. I mean, first of all, they're all awesome. I have this, I'm trying to think. Like
this is a tough question. I put you on the spot a little bit, so if you can't think of anything, like, don't worry.
Well, I mean, okay, so in terms of like specific memories, I don't necessarily have any, but in terms of like who they are, I feel like Caleb, like when I was watching videos of him, he always felt very like serious. He's got the tattoos and the beard and all of that, but he is legitimately one of the funniest people I've ever met. Yeah. And just like everyone's so nice, and I don't know. Seth's amazing. He's a genius when it comes to tech. He's always there to help. He's like he may not be on Team Gary, but he's like still on Team Gary. Let's be real. He wants to help as much as he can, and that's amazing. So he definitely kept me sane for the first couple months.
Yeah, that's awesome. But just before we kind of move on from Team Gary and all that, What was your first day like?
Oh my gosh. So they put you through an orientation. So like it's like a week long, your first day, and they basically take you through all of the capacities of Vayner. So you sit down and you learn all about the company, the zeitgeist, what it feels like, what your job is, all of that. But like my first day on Team Gary, I literally walked in and I sat down with Caleb and I was like, what do I do? Like, where do I even start? And he was like, oh, no problem. Pulls up like a list, like a huge list of videos. And he's like, pick one. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. We are like not even like toe in the water. Like this was like a drop kick into the deep end. And I sat down and I failed miserably at making that video. Finding the footage and like having, and I like to consider myself like someone that has a very good memory, but like the level of knowledge that this team has of Gary's like prior work and all of those things is alarming. Even like I can feel myself doing it more and more as I'm here. I'm like, oh yeah, like 3 months ago he talked about this and he was wearing this, and like you really have to get to that place. So like sitting down with a video, I remember it was like a video about like your age is irrelevant. And really, I was like, oh, I feel good about that. And I'm like, that feels good. And then I sat down on my computer and I was like, I don't know what the fuck to make. Like, I have no idea where to begin. And obviously, like, we're a very like tight team. There's not a lot of extra room for someone to sit down and like hold your hand. So it was definitely alarming. I have since figured out my systems and like how I approach videos, which is totally different than how someone else approaches videos. But that first day was rough. And they're always very good about like, it's okay. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not supposed to be here.
That's awesome. But like for most creatives, like you have what would be described as a dream job for a lot of people. So what would your advice be to kind of aspiring creators?
Yeah, I mean, if this is something that you aspire to do, like this is just the first in so many opportunities that are coming up the bend. People every day are starting to film their lives. And, you know, if you want to work for Gary, like it's a simple system to work here. It's provide value, get good at your craft, and be persistent. Keep trying. You know, so many people do that one video and then it doesn't get attention and then they just stop. And it's like Jason was out filming other people. He was working with paparazzi. He was out of 4Ds filming a client of 4Ds, and that's how he got his job here. That's how he got his foot in the door. So like it's the ability to not see A or B, but see all of the work in between and be like, okay, I'm going to make it work. I'm willing to sacrifice whatever it takes or to work towards that goal in whatever capacity I can in order to get there. Mm-hmm. Don't give up.
I like that. I wanted to ask about some different things in culture and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think I saw with one of your bios maybe that you're vegan.
So New York has ruined this. I was vegan for 4.5-5 years. I still madly agree with the zeitgeist. I'm just like a hypocrite right now. I'm dealing with my own like way of emotionally dealing with this. But yeah, I haven't been plant-based for a while. But yes, I was vegan for a long time and I totally back the movement. So ask me whatever you'd like.
I was just curious as to like what that was like and how it was going to be maintaining that with such a busy schedule.
Yeah. So maintaining that with a busy schedule is hard. Being in a new environment, I kind of was like, okay, I'm not going to put a pressure on myself to like do that. I'm going to figure my life out and then I will add that in. And really, I think you have to do that in general, like being aware of certain things. And like when you make a life decision like that, being aware of the fact that like you can't put that much, me personally, I try not to put that much pressure on myself. I eat 95% plant-based because I agree with it and I think it's a good thing. Even now where I'm like flailing, I would love that to be 100%, but 90% is a lot closer to my goal than 100% and unhappy would be. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's a great cause and the science checks out in my mind. Yeah.
And what about minimalism?
I love minimalism. So for so long I classify myself as like a borderline hoarder. I had so much stuff and my space was always cluttered and always just like drowning in materialism. And I found this concept through like Matt D'Avella's documentary.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is like a thing. People have just what they need. And I was done. I love it. It's amazing to walk into your space every night and know that like I know where everything I own is. I can pick up and move to New York in 30 days because I don't have a lot of stuff. Like things like that is just like stress-free.
So how did you go about sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. But the day that you walk in and you put a hole in like one of your t-shirts, you're like, God, I have to go get another t-shirt. Like that's the only downside.
Yeah. How did you go about decluttering everything?
So I was in a situation where when that first happened, I was moving. I think, going to LA when I found that documentary, or I had just gotten back from LA and I was trying to like downsize into from a 1-bedroom apartment into 1 room in my mother's house. And I was like, I can't do the boxes. I'm done. I can't do this. And it really just was like picking a segment of my room. I did not Marie Kondo it. Like I was like, I'm going to take this corner and I'm going to clean this corner and then I'll take that corner tomorrow. And just like really went after it hardcore. Mind you, I was also unemployed at the time and trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. And so like everything was very easy. When you're stressed, you clean.
Yeah. Is there anything else that's kind of caught your attention in culture? And I started with veganism and minimalism because that's 2 things that I know you're familiar with. And it's not that they're trendy, but they're just commanding a lot of attention in culture right now. And is there anything else that's kind of caught your eye that's really big in culture right now?
Oh my goodness. I'm not great on the spot in those kinds of things, but like, I think that there's something very interesting happening in terms of like the travel world. The amount of the new, like our generation and younger, I don't know how old you are, but like I'm going to be 30 soon. And so like figuring that out of like our generation likes to travel. They like to put information and experiences above materialism. And so kind of what does that look like when you have influencers that are traveling that creates a baseline of like, we need to travel more. And then all of a sudden everyone's traveling, which then dilutes the influencer and like that whole world. I don't know. I think it's very interesting. And the influencers in general, where they're going, how that is becoming a job and it is a job, it's a career. So like, where is that going to go in the next 10 years? Mm-hmm. Everyone can't be an influencer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everyone wants to be an influencer right now, which is the crazy part.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Well, and I was just talking about this with someone the other day of like, do you want to be an influencer? Do you actively like know enough about it? There's such a veil over that industry. Like the amount of like, just especially watching Gary has changed how I look at like wanting to create content for my personal stuff. Is like, I don't know that I want to be that in the spotlight. Like people are constantly coming up to Gary and he's so gracious about it and he likes that. But like the average person, like I go to the grocery store looking homeless. Like I don't want to constantly be in the, public eye and like having people know who I am and all of that. I think there's something to be said about wanting it and then actually executing on it. That's a little bit scary.
Mm-hmm. With that in mind though, what I've noticed a lot with the people on Team GaryVee is that they've been able to kind of not leverage his brand, but just within their position, grow a following based off of where they work. So do you think that that's something like you might explore and try to do? Because I feel like just having GaryVee, like Team GaryVee in your bio, like gives you a lot of credibility.
I definitely think it does. And I think there's a space of like being able, what I find intoxicating and like so appealing about being a quote unquote influencer is the ability to share a message with a large audience. Some people like, having that platform. Some people like being known. Some people enjoy the admiration. Like there's so many different facets to it. But I think that would really be where I would want to go if I were to pursue that, is like, how do I put a microphone on the things I believe in? So yeah, absolutely. Like I want to start creating content. I want to do all of those things. But I don't know that I want to do it in terms of like with a goal of being that person in mind.
Mm-hmm. So with that kind of being said, what are some of your long-term goals? I know you say you don't usually think that way, but is there anything like kind of like a North Star, something you're always striving towards in the back of your mind?
I would love to be in a position where I could travel the world, filming, creating content, which is like, I've always had something in my head of like National Geographic or UNICEF or something like that, where you're like putting out information that like really helps people. Pencils of Promise or, Charity Water, all of these that are taking like digital content in a very unique way to support like a message. That's always been something that's intrigued me. Whether or not that's something that I would even enjoy doing, I don't know, but that's something that I've been interested in. I'm just usually just figuring out the next 6 months.
That's fair. So then what's next?
What's next? So my residency is coming up. So I'm kind of in the position of like, the beautiful thing about Vayner is they are very upfront about the fact of you're going into a residency. It's really so you can see if this fits you, whether we see if you fit well in the team. So like, I'm kind of in a transitionary period. I don't know what's next. I don't know if this is going to be a long-term thing. They're one of two options. I either join the team full time and this is my immediate future for the next couple of years. Or I figure something else out. I don't know. It's kind of the fun part.
Yeah, that's fair. But before we wrap up, I ask everyone the same kind of standard list of questions.
Yeah.
First one being, if you're going to dinner and you could take 3 people, it could be anybody from any point in time, dead or alive, who would you take to dinner?
Oh, okay. Bear with me.
Yeah. People always need to take some time with these ones.
Yeah. I definitely would take one of the people I would take would be my great grandfather. He was an immigrant, came over, basically started his own company, built a farm, sold the farm, and they literally built the town I was born in on top of that farm. So I want to pick his brain. He died when my mother was young. Oh my goodness. Do they have to be a real person?
I mean,
like
no one's ever asked that before. If you really want, I'm totally cool if it's a fictional character.
I've been really obsessed with Veronica Mars lately. I would love to go to dinner with her.
Okay.
And probably like, this is hard. This is very hard. I'm trying to think of like, what is his name? The guy, John something, I think. He created the Netflix series Easy, and he did a movie. I'm going to look him up. Hold on.
Yeah, no worries.
But he's a filmmaker based in Chicago, and he does a lot of, I guess you would kind of call it mumblecore, but like just very authentic stories. And he wrote and directed, I believe, a movie called Drinking Buddies. It's on Netflix, and it's actually one of my favorite movies. It's got, let's see, what's his name? Joe Swanberg.
Okay.
But just like a really true, authentic, beautiful film that is, everyone I've shown it to, they're like, oh my God, this movie's so slow, but I just love it so much. Pick his brain.
Okay. What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Best advice. Never come to a table and say, no, this isn't possible. Come to a table and say, I think this would be a better option. Or like, don't tell someone, no, you can't do something. Say, okay, how are we going to balance it? Like, I can't. So it came from a producing professor that was talking about budgets, and she presented it as someone wants a crane. You can't afford the crane. You go to them and you say, okay, I want to give you your crane. I want to give you whatever you need. What are you willing to give up in exchange for that crane? And like, how can I help you help yourself? And I think that really just like applies to life in general. Like anything is possible if you're willing to do what's required to get it.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. When your alarm goes off in the morning, what motivates you to get up and out of bed?
I mean, I love my job. I think I like to work. My mother is an entrepreneur and, dare I say a little bit of a workaholic. So like I grew up in that world of someone that was always working. And I think I emulate that in some capacity. And so it's like, why would you want to do something that you're spending so much time towards that you don't like? And believe me, I've had jobs that I hated, but like every morning I wake up and I'm excited to do what I do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What is one thing about you people would not expect?
I actually get most of my friends think I'm like a very loud personality, but I can actually get really, really shy when I first meet people. It's a thing.
Okay. Do you have any unpopular opinions?
I think Star Wars is a waste of time.
Okay.
Now that everyone that listens to your podcast hates me, I just like, honestly, I got behind. I didn't watch it as a child. And now I'm like, that's like 12 hours of my life I'll never get back. I don't care if it's the best thing ever. Like, it's too much commitment up front.
That's very, very fair. What is one thing that's so important everybody needs to know?
That you really only have what you can do today. Like, it's not about what you did yesterday or what you're doing tomorrow. Like, today is the best you can do. Like, with today is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. So for the final question, I like to flip the script a little bit. What is one question you would like to know the answer to about anything? If you could know, like if you had a crystal ball that could tell you anything, what is one question that you would want to know the answer to?
Ooh. So I've been reading that book, Sapiens, all about like the evolutionary biology and the theory that humans actually came from 7 different types of hominids. And I would like to know if that's real. Like, it's just a theory at this point. They have no way of knowing that like Homo erectus and Homo sapien were like at the same level or like existed at the same time versus like a linear. I want to know that.
Okay.
That's like awesome. Super deep. But
yeah.
It's been like in my brain.
No, that's okay. Some people take that question super deep. Some people take it like, yeah, I love it. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. So
what's your favorite, like, what is the favorite answer you've ever gotten that you were like, it's stuck with you?
I'm trying to think. I don't know. Like one guy asked recently, like what happens when we die, but that takes you like super deep into a bit of a weird place. But like, that's the one where, I mean, that was that episode I published last week. I recorded it probably a month and a half ago now, but like that one where it was just kind of like, it's just an answer I wasn't really expecting. So that was just kind of the one that jumps in my mind right now. Okay. And like, I am so like, once I edit a podcast, like it's not like I forget about it, but like I can't really remember specific details from a lot of my podcasts. Like I'm very much like I edit the episode, I produce the content, and then like when I go to post the content, like a month later when the episode comes out, I'll have to watch back to the social content I make just to make sure I actually grasp. I'm not talking like I don't capture the wrong thing. So that's just a recent one that jumped to my mind. I'm sure there's some other really good ones, but I just can't think of right now.
I love it. Well, I would love to know that as well.
Yeah, but I want to thank you for taking the time to come on this podcast. It went a little longer than I expected. I'm sorry if that took a little time out of your evening.
No, it was great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I just wanted to kind of give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug everything and anything that you got right now.
Okay. Well, if you would like to watch a YouTube channel that I'm not currently posting to, it is Danyah Aossey. Everything's under my name. So Instagram, Twitter, probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is through Instagram. And it's just DANYAH and .AOSSEY.
Awesome. Well,
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you once again for coming on the podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. Whether you've listened the entire way through, you've only listened to bits and pieces, I really appreciate you taking the time to check this out. Guys, do me a favor, go and follow Danyah on everything. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. And if you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at @theJacobKelly. Feel free to come and say hello. And if you'd like to follow the podcast, just search up My Social Life and it will come up. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.